Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending this virtual Executive Lead Member for Children's Services Decision Day. This Decision Day is being webcast on YouTube via the County Council website. We have no deputations today, and if I take you to the first item on the agenda, which is a key decision, and it's item 1, Home to School Transport Entitlement Policy Consultation, and we've got 2 members who would like to speak on this before we go to Martin to present the report. So can I please welcome Councillor Jackie Porter to say a few words about this.
Thank you, Councillor Chad. I think we had a very useful discussion on this morning, and I'm really pleased that you were there. So thank you very much for being there. And I do think you will have also gathered that there were a number of councillors right across the whole room who had reservations about the policy as it stands. The officer placed a very healthy warning that it was on a case-by-case basis. But once the policy is enshrined, those words case by case are lost, I think, in many ways. And I am worried that over the years and in future years, the words case by case will not be part of what's imparted to parents, and parents will think this is it or nothing. So they will be expected to follow this. And I am worried about the degradation of the rights of parents and the difficulties of the children and parents and how that will be managed. So the concerns really are, firstly, this morning I felt scrutiny was interesting, but we didn't look at the 2 separate results separately, the proposal 1 and proposal 2, and they have very different implications. Proposal 1 is about taking children to a common pickup point. And although in theory that sounds a very useful idea, taking a child up to a mile is a very complicated, can be a very complicated and long process, much longer than I think we anticipate. And that process appears to be, we've chosen a mile, I'm not quite sure why a mile has been chosen, but it's a long way. And although Martin stated that actually they wouldn't expect that to be the norm, it would be in the policy. So the challenge is that the right distance? Or should, in fact, there be any distance at all? And some of the other councillors made some very compelling cases of why, whether to take away the opportunity to collect from home as a matter of course would be a problem for them, and they felt take away the principle of independence for that child, as well as also take away that inclusivity aspect of going to school. They're very worried. Parents have explained to me that they'd be very worried that their child would not actually go to school on some days, and so it would reduce the opportunity for them to be fully educated. The second point is related to the shared use of buses for children where there are special needs children and non-special needs children. I think the aspect of putting children of the 2 together on the different buses hasn't been properly explored from the point of view of the access to special needs schools and how you take children onto those sites. And some of that interesting logistics was actually touched on at this morning's meeting. But not only that part of the journey, but the whole journey of how you manage the escort aspect of that on a mixed bus without effectively isolating the child who is from a special needs, going to special needs school. And the third aspect of this was the principle of sending all children, or larger numbers of children, on mixed buses. I mean, the general principle of all special needs children or mainstream, I don't think is difficult. And I appreciate that there are some children that are more independent than others. And I think Councillor Tustane is going to talk about this. But independence only comes as and when a child is ready. And it's very difficult to impose independence on a child without some effect on their emotional well-being. And we are very concerned about that, particularly if this becomes a policy, which isn't on a case-by-case basis, because that's not what the policy says. the policy says this is what will happen. But it actually means that long term, children will be forced into that independence, particularly at transition, which they don't necessarily relish and which could cause yet another emotional barrier to their well-being. For that reason, I'm afraid I object to the policy as it's being put forward.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. We hear from Councillor Pratt-Baines.
Thank you, Councillor Chad. I'd also like to echo those concerns just raised by Councillor Porter. I will also again start by thanking the amazing team of officers for the work that they do, especially Martin and his team, who I know have worked incredibly hard on this. And for the benefit of those residents listening this afternoon to this decision day, I will go over what I spoke about this morning at the Select Committee. Today, there's a clear choice to be made by Councillor Chad at her decision day, whether or not to approve these recommendations and changes to the home school transport policy that are set out before us today. These aren't just slight alterations, they are substantial ones, and if approved, will go on to affect thousands of younger people and families across Hampshire. These recommendations include, as Councillor Porter just mentioned, the promotion of on-transport mixing of pupils from mainstream and specialist schools, pupils that be of different age groups and levels of education, as well as complex additional needs. These proposals will also see over 3,000 SEND pupils who are, as of this moment, collected from the safety of their own homes, being faced with up to a 1 mile commute from the nearest pickup point. I recently spoke to Nikki, a head teacher at the incredible Rachel Maddox Special School in my division, about how these proposed changes could affect her pupils' families and the school staff. Her pupils sometimes display extremely challenging behaviour that requires specialist support at all times of the day. Some pupils may be easily provoked by others, and some may require to enter vehicles before others due to their complex behavioural needs and the impact any disruption may have on other pupils and staff. Dedicated school staff and transport escorts have to be watchful at all times to ensure the safety of every single pupil at every single moment, and emotional breakdowns are something that they have to deal with regularly. How is it then fair on these very pupils that we should make them share a vehicle with, say, a non-SEND secondary school pupil that attends a different school and may not know how to act or behave in those situations that can be extremely emotional and stressful at times? As raised in the consultation responses, bullying is also a huge concern to parents on transport, and it's also worth noting over 75% of the feedback was against the mixing of children and 71% against collection points. Rachel Maddox, along with every other school in the county, has parents that have children at different schools, and their morning routines are already at a stretching point, having to ensure that their children are in before the school bell rings. Aside from the complex medical needs some of our SEND pupils have, and the issues that this may cause getting to a drop-off point a mile from their home, how can we ask parents, some of whom may not physically be able to take their children a mile away, to bear the brunt of these financial cuts and disrupt their morning routines that work for their own families? It's no surprise that the local government ombudsman reported that some SEND children are becoming too anxious to attend school and that they are being failed by some councils. Is this not what we are facing right here, right now? The possibility of potentially failing some of our SEND pupils and their families who have already had to deal with more than most of us every single day. The following email is one that I received from a resident whose daughter these very policy changes would affect. Safe pickup points. I can't keep my daughter safe at home, let alone a pickup point. My daughter likes to eat non-foods, squash dog poo, which is a fun sensory thing, mess with things that she shouldn't, such as try and open people's car doors. She lets herself into strangers' houses, which is absolutely terrifying, and has zero awareness of dangers and bolts. She's bolted naked from our house before. We can't walk with her anywhere. For a start, she likes to take lots of breaks by sitting on the floor and refusing to move, or makes us carry all 4 stone of her. She has been assessed by social care department as needing 2 to 1 in the community. My daughter is very strong and can easily overpower an adult. How can we keep her safe whilst walking to a pickup point and whilst waiting for the bus? She's a flight risk and can easily wriggle free. Also, if the bus is late, a lot of children will have meltdowns. How can we manage that on site? I have grave fear for my daughter's safety, and given the variables at a pickup point, for example, the bus being late, how can we ensure that autistic children leave for school nice and calm? The bus being delayed or late would be a huge trigger, and my daughter would have lost it before she had even started the day at school. making education inaccessible for her. She won't learn if she's stressed and fundamentally won't go to school that day or any other when we can't get her out of the door. The bus is routine and familiar, pick-up points won't be. Things change, different cars parked, noisy motorbikes, flashing headlights, dogs barking, birds tweeting. All of these noises frighten my daughter daily, but she is non-verbal and can't tell me. She just gets very, very upset and then tries to run away from us. We couldn't comfort her. She would run away. How do I manage this? How can I minimise the stress of getting to that bus stop? As per statutory guidance, it states the maximum journey time to get to school should be less than 45 minutes of primary age pupils. How can this be maintained when getting to that bus stop could take this amount of time? Us as parents already have extremely unsupported and stressful lives. I think that they need to think very carefully about the effects on the overall family well-being. If we have a mental breakdown, it will just push more pressure onto children's services, so please think of this before pushing through the change. We also need to consider how we are supposed to get another sibling to school. I can't take my youngest to school late every day, and I can't do the school run with both at the same time due to my eldest needing a 2-to-1. I'm sure everyone listening on this call today will join me in thanking that resident for sending in her views of how these potential changes could impact her family in the real world. My next point is safeguarding. How do we ensure that every SEND pupil coming into this proposed transport system is kept safe at every single step? In the report, it references individual analysis, and that's what we heard again this morning. But yet again, I do question, with yearly cuts to education and the increasing numbers of SEND pupils, up to 25% more than this time last year, are we simply going to have the resource to complete these individual assessments moving forward? How long will these assessments take to complete? And will they be continuously revised on every single individual basis? It only takes one to fall through the net for there to be a major safeguarding risk. Can we be certain that every SEND pupil waiting at the collection point, potentially a mile away from their home, is 100% safe, or indeed safe on a mixed bus at every single moment? After all, as Martin mentioned earlier, there are 5 million trips to school in Hampshire per year, which is huge. Already in the UK, we have over 400,000 young people accessing mental health support, with the Childhood Trust reporting 47% of children feel stressed post-pandemic, and 9% of which are self-harming, according to their parents. We cannot afford to add to these figures. We need to support our younger people, and especially those with SEND. That doesn't happen by implementing these changes. These proposals affect those most at risk and those that are most vulnerable. I fully understand that HEC are given a pot of money to deliver all of their services, but the prioritisation of funding is something that can be looked at. And I'd like to take this last opportunity to remind colleagues and listeners today that it was only a few months ago that £1 million worth of refurbishment of the old chamber was given the green light here at Hampshire, among heavy protests from all opposition. And the fact that the room that we were sat in today for select committee was far more practical and best suited to modern day meetings speaks volumes. That £1 million could have meant that these proposals we see today, cutting £986,000 of funding, may not have had to take place. That is just one example, and I implore you, Councillor Chad, the exec member, to look again at the figures and the impact that these decisions today could have on vulnerable people's lives across Hampshire, and to not approve the recommendations set before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bain. Councillor Tosting, say something before you go to the paper as well.
Thank you. Yes, I just want to reiterate basically from what Councillor Baines and Councillor Porter have already said, but there are a couple of points I'd like to raise as well. So we talk about inclusion. Now, obviously, we applaud inclusion when it does works well, and obviously on a bus, you're not in an educational inclusion perspective. So we're not talking about that sort of differentiation of lessons and that sort of finer detail. However, the child's already been opted to go to a special educational needs setting. That is an opt-out of inclusion. It's a choice I personally made with my son because I felt that was better for him. And if you're then pushing them into this situation, you are forcing them into an inclusion environment that parents may well not want that to happen. The idea Councillor Porter mentioned about the independence, and I agree, independence is something that happens as and when it's ready for the child. It requires very careful management, and having this potentially an environment that could cause, this could happen in a very unmanaged way, could actually cause more harm than help. If a child's also escorted, then essentially they're not really being seen as independent. In actual fact, what you can then create is this othering environment, which will make them stand out, and that's where we get into the issues around conflict. And those children that may, I'll say, more mischievous, or not, and certainly who do not understand how to deal with it, could then pick on them. You've also got the idea of escorts then having to deal with children from other schools when they're just there to look after the children, which could be quite stressful for them. So that's another side of it. Safeguarding. Parents, whether you've got a child who maybe would say borderline, which are the children we're talking about here. I mean, obviously, I appreciate the individual circumstances, and children who are more severely impacted are more likely to still retain their services. But if you've got a child who's more borderline, and then a parent, because of their work situation, which I know doesn't fall into this, but this is what will happen in real life, then leaves that child at a bus stop, you then have an issue that child is put in a more vulnerable position than if that child had been picked up from home. So I think that's something else that really needs to be considered. And then finally, I think one of the most important things is the overall impact on the well-being of these children and their families, because living with disability is really tough. And the more changes we have, the more things that make life more difficult, the harder it gets, the more isolating it gets, and then the further fallout. And obviously the positive, proactive stuff that we really try hard to do, you will damage. So they're the issues that I think about this. And likewise, I will not be supporting this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Costain. Can I please invite Martin to present the report?
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm sitting in a room, it has been picked up. Okay, terrific. So the report is asking you, Councillor Shadden, is recommending to you that you introduce 2 changes into the homeschool transport policy. It's important to stress again, as we have done in the previous discussions of the paper, that it's not changing or taking away eligibility. The 2 changes will introduce scope to use 2 particular mechanisms in organising transport, as has been mentioned, one of them being the use of coordinated pick-up and drop-off points, and the other arranging transport more than we do at the moment with multiple destinations for children, so children from different schools on the same vehicle. It's also, as part of the paper, we've made it quite clear that the proposals start with an element of the possibility of savings, and we mentioned up to £986,000 as a possibility as we start to roll out these possible changes. The changes won't start from the 1st of September. They'll start to new arrangements that begin in September, and we will also go through a process of review of existing arrangements, and where appropriate, we may bring in changes, having first talked to all the stakeholders and communicated with all the stakeholders along the way through those changes to transport arrangements. The real headline, perhaps in this element of what I want to say, is that we're trying to ensure, both in the first changes in September and the first school year of 22-23, that we will be introducing changes that take account of the individual needs, the individual circumstances of the children and families that are on transport. And there's a question around, will that be maintained? In paragraph 4, we mentioned that there is legislation behind our homeschool transport service and provision, and we mentioned statutory guidance that sits behind that homeschool transport service, behind the legislation and then behind all our transport. If you don't mind, I'll read out paragraph 35 from the statutory guidance, which says consideration should be given to the walking distance required in order to access transport. The maximum distances will depend on a range of circumstances, including the age of the child, their individual needs, and the nature of the route they're expected to walk to the pick-up or set-down points, and should be tried to be combined with transport time when considering the overall duration of a journey. We've already made that commitment. The idea of the time taken to walk to the pick-up point is included in our assessment of the 45-minute and 75-minute preferred maximum distance. It also goes on to say, with regards to pick-up points, local authorities may at their discretion use appropriate pick-up points when making travel arrangements. and for the arrangements to be suitable, they must be safe and reasonably stress-free to enable the child to arrive at school ready for a day of study. That great big aspirational final sentence is behind all of our transport now, because it's a statutory requirement, and it will continue to be a statutory requirement unless the Department for Education somehow withdrew that paragraph from their existing statutory guidance. So will we maintain this case-by-case basis into the future? I believe I have to say really strongly that we will, because it's a requirement on us in all of our daily dealings with children, families and schools in organising homeschool transport. Just going back to the paper briefly, we're detailing, and we talked about this morning, it's definitely not a blanket approach. It's definitely not intended to apply to the 3,200 young people who have special educational needs and use transport to access their daily education. It will be done on a case-by-case basis and where appropriate, and the savings don't require that it's done to all the children with special needs at all. You know, they're very pragmatic compared to the amount of spend on contracts providing homeschool transport services. And so I would just finish by bringing forward the recommendations for you, Councillor Chad, that they're as presented in the paper.
Thank you, Martin. And thank you for everyone else for their comments, both this morning in the Select Committee and this afternoon prior to the presentation of the report. There was a really good debate at the Select Committee this morning about it. I did listen. I have listened to each of the emails that I have received as well. I want our homeschool transport to be inclusive, to help support transition in our children's lives, but also to be sustainable, for us to be able to continue to deliver this for all the children that we currently do and deliver it for, and for all those children going forward as well. And part of that sustainability is trying to make sure that there are less vehicles on the road, but then also that we can use those additional vehicles at times when that we will see an increase in children needing this provision going forward. Our SEM figures are potentially showing that. So I think that the fact that it is going to be on a case-by-case basis, that Martin has referred to the statutory guidance, and that specifically the paragraph 35 of that statutory guidance, that I am in full support of the two recommendations, and my decision is to support both of those recommendations, that we will work with parents, with schools, to look at case-by-case basis over a 2 to 3 year period. This will be rolled out on. We heard in the Select Committee today that those children that are able to meet a collective point to be picked up and dropped off, those children that are able to go on a mixed provision as well to get to school, that we should be looking at those opportunities to make sure that we have got this service going forward in the future, and that we are working towards a more inclusive way of delivering homeschool transport, a more sustainable way, a way that's that is also better for our environment going forward as well. Our young people want to live in a nice environment. We want the environment to be better for them going forward as well. So on that basis, I will take you to the recommendations, and I'm happy to approve recommendation 2 and recommendation 3. Can I also make the point of thanking Martin and all the members of the homeschool transport team for the report, for the consultation work, but also for all their work that they have done always especially during the pandemic, actually, when transport was, we had so many different children in and out of schools at different times of the day, and you all rose to the challenge and delivered, continued to deliver the service. So can I just thank you all, and I'm sure that others on this call, despite not agreeing with this policy change, would absolutely agree with the work that you all do in that team.
Thank
you. But thank you, Martin, for that today, and thank you for answering all the questions in the select committee as well today. It's greatly appreciated. Can I now bring everyone to the next item on the agenda, which is Hayter House, and I believe Bob is presenting the report on this one. Thank you, Bob.
I am. Thank you, Councillor Chad. Good afternoon. The purpose of the report is as noted in paragraph 1, to seek your spend approval to convert Hayter House in Romsey to a new children's home for children between the ages of 12 and 17 years. I was not going to propose to read out the full detail of the report today because there's no changes in the report since Chairman's briefing. But I would obviously like to draw your attention to the recommendations as noted in paragraph 2, which is that the exec lead member for Children's Services grant spend approval to the project proposals for Hayter House at a total cost of £1.2 million. I was going to stop at that point, Councillor Chan.
Thank you, Bob. And I would just like to note on this point that the engagement with the local member, and to thank you, Bob, for that engagement with the local member. And I know the local member is very supportive of this, and just to thank you and the team for making sure that they are taken on the journey, so to speak, in regards to this. So thank you for that. I think this is a wonderful thing to be able to provide for our young people, and much needed as well. And I foresee that in the future that we'll be looking at provision like this going forward. So on that basis, I will go straight to the recommend. Kieran, did you want to come in at all? Sorry, no. Okay.
I was just here in case there are any questions, Councillor Chad.
Does anyone have any questions on this one? I think possibly not. No. Okay. So if we go straight to the recommendations, and it's recommendation 2, and I'm happy to approve the project proposal for Hayter House at the cost of 1.2 million. So thank you very much, Bob, for all your hard work. And I look forward to visiting actually in the future with other members as well.
Be very welcome. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that brings me to the end of my decision day today. Thank you all for attending. And can I please ask Adam to stop the live webcast?
I'll confirm as soon as that's